Um, Basically, I started the research. I was looking at the problem of the reduction of pairwise comparisons, and during the literature review, I came across the finding that there's a number of different approaches to test various refinements or various techniques. And coming from uh, more than 35 years in the IT and corporate IT, I'm drilled to the importance of properly testing software or approaches, algorithms. And I was taken by the problem of properly defining the value domain of priority vectors that are used to test the various approaches, refinements. So basically, oh, here. So I found that there was a lack of commonality in the evaluations. And so I thought it was a compelling need to have an evaluation framework that would enable us to have informative comparisons between the different techniques, various approaches to refine. So basically what I'm trying to do is to do two things here: to raise the awareness of the absence of a common ground, although I'm sure aware that you are all conscious of that. And in my master's thesis, which I completed last year, I exposed some foundational elements or orientations to resolve or circumscribe the problem. Basically, so one of the angles is disparity of the numerous aspect, whether it's the dimensions of matrices or the similarity measures that are used. And we haven't found yet an objective limit of precision. So that's one of the things I try to solve. Just to illustrate here, it's just a sample of a number of studies, and you can see that the idea, whether it's trying to reduce the does it affect the selection of the pairwise comparisons or some other technique. The extent of cases tested are basically sometimes just a few examples or data from a number of participants. Proximity measures are either none or it's incomplete, or there's all kinds, a whole soup of various proximity measures. The matrix size, sometimes it's just one, sometimes it's a few. I was happy to see, I don't know if some of you were in the presentation earlier by Paul, who ran his logic through matrices from size 5 to 24. So I was happy to see that, because I think that if we are to say this technique would be useful, we need to check for a large number of dimensions where it will be applicable.
Excuse me, sorry interrupting you, but could you explain what do you mean by limit of precision so that we can understand you better? Because what do you mean by limit of precision? Could you define it for us?
Okay, limit of precision is when you say, for example, in the reduction of comparisons, if you try with a complete matrix, you get a priority vector, and then you reduce the number of comparisons, and then you derive a new priority vector. And so how far is the approximation from what you would have gotten if you had completed all the comparisons? So how precise can we be with objectively whether we do all the comparisons or not? So well, I'll get to that just a bit later. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I found that there was insufficient coverage, basically. There's a lot of text in the presentation. You can go back to it later. It's informative, but given the time frame that I have, I'm probably going to fly by a few of them. So I was talking about the reduction of number of comparisons, but the same problem, the same observations can be made for selecting different numerical scales. or methods for deriving the priority vector. So these are the conclusions that I draw from the literature review. There's a lack of characteristics to define how we can circumscribe the value domain. There's no convention for the size of the matrices or the proximity measures. And the limit of precision is either unstated or set arbitrarily. And I found it confusing to say that, for instance, we were going to ask the decision maker if the priorities make sense. But if we're doing AHP to find the priorities, how can we use, the decision maker's perspective to evaluate where we got? So, because and for instance, I know that from practice, the decision makers will be surprised with the priorities that they get once the evaluation is made. So I set out to determine a few characteristics that will guide the definition of the value domain, select an adequate measure of proximity, and an objective limit of precision. Am I running out of time soon?
You're doing perfectly well, Dr.
Okay.
Rivest. So
Okay.
you still have 4 more minutes.
Great. Okay, so I'm just going to give you the gist of the idea here. If you look at I came across a sentence in a text by Dr. Ishizaka, which it said that a high difference of performances can also be highly discriminating, even if there's a low weight to the criterion. So I set out to, and my question was, how do I approach this? And if you look at the 3 types of priority vectors, like type 1 would be one where there's a definite leader alternative and the rest of the weight is distributed among the others. So that type 1 would be highly discriminating. And at the other end, the type 3, which would be the gray line here, that the options pretty much get the same weight, so it's close to no difference. So using this concept, I took this concept and looking at it geometrically, we're talking about a situation with 3 alternatives here. The center point of the centroid would be the point of no difference. If all alternatives get the same weight, there's no difference. It's not discriminating. And if one options get the largest weight and the others get the lowest weight, then you get the most discriminating point. And it lends itself from a geometric interpretation that the angle between the 2 points would be a measure of the discriminating power of the priority vector. So with this logic in mind, I set out to define a value domain, and this is just a base. It could be evolved, but it's a good starting point. I think that the dimensions, if we compare between 2 and 18 alternatives, and we consider the potential for discrimination and the power of discrimination, and one thing for the potential of discriminating, if the difference in weight between the maximum option and the minimum is only a factor of 5, then whatever the intermediate points will be, it can never be more discriminating. So the ratio between the highest and the lowest value will be a factor to consider. So I set out to determine what were the bounds for the upper and lower bounds for the power of discrimination, for various value of the potential and various value versus dimensions. And this is this little line here, dotted lines. I will explain the next slide. The simulation that is being used draws from the uniform distribution. And when you draw from the uniform distribution, the points that you get cover only this region. so that there's a large portion of the potential power of discrimination that is not covered. So I set out to find a way to resolve that also. Just gonna go quick here because I'm lacking time. So I was able to find a way to generate points which will give the power of discrimination to cover all the area or the zone between the lower and the upper bound. There are details on this in the appendices of this presentation. So proximity measure. It's well known that it's not an exact science, but it's the choice of the similarity measure will be one that makes sense to those who have to interpret it. So the cosine distance has properties that make it comprehensive. So I selected that to conduct this experiment. Obviously, there are other measures. The compatibility measures are also probably pertinent, but the numbers that they give are on a different scale. I find it interesting that the cosine distance can make sense in terms of interpretation. The purpose and limit of precision. I'm coming to that. The reason to have an objective limit of precision would be that if we have to compare the results of two methods, which would give us result 1 and result 2, we can only say that result 1 is either gets a better result or result 2 gets a better result. But if we have a limit of precision, then we got 3 possible cases that result 1 and 2 have not reached the limit of precision. So there's improvements to be made further. If results 1 is within the limit of precision, then we've found a solution. And if both are within or lower, more precise than the limit of precision, and further improvements are maybe superfluous. So the concept of limited precision is illustrated here, that with the problem of the reduction of comparisons. If you start from a complete matrix and then you start reducing a number of comparisons, you may get away from the vector that you would have gotten. But if you are within the limit of precision, then you got a suitable approximation. And if you have too few comparisons, then your approximation has a shortcoming. It's not meeting the goal. So that may be used to set a limit to the number of comparisons that are needed. And how to set an objective limit of precision. I used the concept that was described first in Triantafilou, which you call the forward error, or we could call the discretization error, because there are gaps due to the fact that we use a discrete judgment scale, and you will apply a numerical scale to it, and this will give you gaps in the potential results. So if we generate a before vector, build a corresponding matrix, discretize it, and compute the after vector, and then make the comparison with a proximity measure, we can find like this here are the points covering all the values for the power of discrimination for a given size. I ran the experiment for all sizes from 3 to 18, and you get pretty much the same results, that the error of discretization is within 6 degrees. So you can say that between 5 and 6 degrees range, that's your limit of precision that you can get. And it's given by the fact that we're using a discrete scale. So how to apply this, or what's the use of this? I decided to apply that to there are a number of arguments that have been made in the past about is the original right eigenvector a better solution than the geometric mean, or vice versa. And there's also a cosine maximization approach that was developed by Ku and Lin. And I found it interesting because it basically using the concept of cosine as well. And I ran the experiment. Now, of course, you want to introduce some perturbation in the matrices that you generate to have a range, a potential range of consistency ratios. That makes sense. So I applied a technique by Herman and Koshkodaj for generating what they call not so inconsistent matrices. And you run that, and then you measure the distance between, or the similarity between the vectors, let's say, obtained by the geometric mean versus the eigenvalue, or the cosine maximization versus the eigenvalue. And they're all within the limit of precision. So either of these measures, based on this result, you can say that potentially any of these measures will give you a similar result. It's not so distant, it's not so different that to say that one is better than the other, but they all give pretty much all point the same way.
Dr. Rivest, in order to have time for the Q&A, you will need to start wrapping up pretty soon.
Yeah, I'm coming to the conclusion here. Just to say that things to consider that if you use a different numerical scale, then your lower and upper bounds will be different, and the limit of precision might change. Like for instance, here if you use a geometric scale with the base radical 2, then your limit of precision comes to 4 degrees. So the main contribution of this study is that was able to come up with a way to characterize the priority vectors so that the value domain can be defined and used as an orientation to generate simulation data. A proximity measure that has a rational interpretation and works across the various applications, and an objective limit of precision. These are the key references. There are more, there's about 50 or 60 references in my study, in my thesis, that you can find here. And I worked alone on this, like Indiana Jones trying to solve this problem. Now I'm happy to share that with the community. Thank you.
Can I see your slide 18, please?
Yes, yes.
Can you use compatibility for these purposes?
Yes, yes. There's a number of measures that in the thesis I used the Ruzicka proximity and some others, but and I also tried while researching using the compatibility measure that is defined in the original AHP book by Thomas Satie. Yeah. And also the G compatibility. I met Claudio Garuti in London 4 years ago, and we had long exchanges and discussions about the fact that the G compatibility gives similar, with the threshold of 10%, gives similar results with the cosine at 5 degrees. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Let me tell you that I really enjoyed your research while we wait. Do we have any more questions? Or Dr. Rivest?
One question.
Of course.
Till what minimum level can we reduce number of pair comparisons? Because it's always a problem, like in more clear statistical regression analysis, for instance, if we reduce number of observations, we go to more exact approximation, actually till absolute interpolation of points by our dependency. But from statistical point of view, all the results become more exact, so precision is higher, deviations are less, errors reduces. But from statistical point of view, results are arbitrary, because with any new observation, the picture can change absolutely. We would have not this dependence, but absolutely going to in some orthogonal direction, for instance. So how to find or which measure already known in statistics to use here? For instance, something like F statistics with its probability, because again, the measure could be very good, seems to be very good, but its significance is close to zero. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I've not approached this from a statistical perspective, but I've read extensively, like the work we've got Bill with us. I read Bill's, I actually communicated with him and he shared some more thoughts on this. More with the finding that Bill, that you shared in 2009, I think, that the comparisons between the larger difference between alternatives, like are more effective to find the proper weights. That given that the fact that if you compare alternatives which are close, you give them a weight that is small, but the actual error of discretization with these small numbers is larger. So coming back, Stan, to what you first said, that most likely using this approach, we could show that limited number of comparisons will give us a better result. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yes, thank you.
And I think maybe this precision might create problem if we have AMP problem, because some some criteria which has the least importance might create some. If it affects a lot of criteria, it might create problem. What do you think about it?
There are many angles to consider. This is just a start. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that if we don't have any more questions, we are ready to close this session. I hope that you will join us in the next general poster session. And otherwise, see you tomorrow. Thank you so much to everybody.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you, chairing this session.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Rivest, for a very good presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you all. See you in the poster session.
Mhm.